Hey guys, Stockaholics, thank you guys for being here today. Does inflation create inflation? Over the last several months, like a lot of other people out there, I have been thinking about the concept of inflation. If you go to the store, grocery store, you may notice that the prices on a lot of the items you may buy has gone up dramatically. If you go to the gas pump, at least compared to a year and a half ago, you may be paying twice as much as you were before. And so like a lot of other people, I've been thinking about this too. Recently, though, I've been thinking about it in terms of the monetary system that we have. Now, there's a famous economist, his name is Milton Friedman, and he's famous for his quote, "Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon." We have something called the fractional reserve banking system. The private banking system in the United States is the main source of creation for new currency units historically. That kind of changed recently with the medical event. But historically, that is kind of the source of new currency units. So the way this is designed, when somebody goes to the bank and let's say they want to get a loan of any type, whether that's a housing loan, it's a car loan, it's a consumer loan, business loan, whatever loan it may be, when that person goes to the bank and they get a loan from that bank, then they are issued brand new currency units that did not exist before. And so in the traditional lens, what this does is it creates inflation, right? Now, recently I was at a restaurant. There's a small eatery called L&L where I go. They serve plate lunches here in Hawaii. And they have a sign inside the restaurant and it says something, I'm paraphrasing, essentially that said, as long as prices keep going up, we will, or for their goods that they're purchasing, their inputs, as long as those prices keep going up, we will keep raising the prices. And so they had this sign posted right at their register. And so when I went there and I purchased a meal the other day, I was like, wow, okay, that price went up a lot. And then I noticed the sign too, and I was like, okay, well, I guess so, it's inflation, right? But what I was doing while I was waiting for my food, I was kind of observing what some of the other customers were doing in the restaurant. And so I saw this other gentleman, he came up and he ordered something too. And I was kind of watching his reaction when he was ordering. And I saw his face and he also said, oh, wow. I could tell that he was kind of shocked by the prices that he was paying. And I was like, he kind of said, oh, he grumbled a little bit, and then he paid the lady for his plate lunch. And so I didn't think much about that, but a little bit later, I went home and I thought back to something that had happened to me a while ago. And I got a letter in the mail from my local bank. Essentially, they were offering me one of those loans that I mentioned a little while ago. Some kind of a consumer loan, house loan, I don't know what kind of loan it was, but basically it was an advertisement to go and get a loan. And I briefly looked at it, it's one of those spam mails, and then I kind of threw it away. Then I thought about it a little bit, and I was thinking about the interest rate that they were offering on this loan. The interest rate they were offering on the loan was something like 5%. And we know that the official inflation rate is something like 10%, right? And so I was thinking about that for a second. And I was like, would it actually just make sense to get this loan? Even though I don't really care to get this loan. I'm pretty debt averse. I don't like debt. But then I thought about it for a little bit and I was like, wow, does it actually make mathematical sense for me to just go and get the loan? I probably won't do it. I just hate debt. But then I was thinking about like this guy, the gentleman in the line in L&L. And I was like, what would the average person do if they see that their prices for all of the goods that they're purchasing are going up every day? And they're in the line seeing the L&L, this average Joe and Jane, what would they do if they put two and two together just like I did? And let's say that they're a little bit less debt averse. What would that do to actual inflation? Because remember, if you go and get a loan, that actually creates more inflation. So I was thinking, does this inflation that we've seen recently have the potential to create even more inflation? Now, when I was thinking about this a little bit, there are a lot of similarities between what has happened recently and what has happened in the past. Now, in the 1970s, there was rampant inflation. I'm not saying that that's going to happen again. I have no idea. But there are a little odd similarities between what has happened recently and what has happened in the past. So in the 1970s, in 1971, I believe, President Nixon took us off of the gold standard, and then we basically went into a pure fiat monetary system at that time. Now, what was interesting is right after that, there was rampant inflation in the United States. I think that there's a possibility that a lot of people may have gone out, just like I was hypothesizing might happen today, and they got out a bunch of loans that maybe they didn't need. Now, what's interesting that also happened in the 1970s is that you had an expansionary demographic of boomers at the time, young adults, who were entering their home buying years. And so when you combine the fact that they just removed the gold standard and they also had this expansionary demographic of young adults who were in those home buying years, who were going out and getting a bunch of loans, those two events combined could have created that intense inflation that you saw in the 1970s. A lot of what I think is the demand for loans is just traditionally, it's just demographics. So if you have more bodies, more people in their loan aged years to go out and get a loan, you're going to get more loans. And if you're going to get more loans, you're going to get more currency units. And if you're going to get currency units against the supply of goods and services that you have in the economy, you're going to see inflation. And so that's really what happened in the 1970s. You had this expansionary adult demographic going in, getting a bunch of loans. At the same time, there was that kind of that initial kickoff event where the gold standard was removed, right? There's also a bunch of really interesting things that I learned recently that happened. People were really panicking. They tried to get out of the United States dollar, the Swiss franc, which is kind of like the historical kind of safe, the Swiss banking system, like the safe place to be for foreigners putting their money. A bunch of Americans tried to flee the dollar into the Swiss franc. And the Swiss banking system was so overwhelmed with foreign demand that they actually drove interest rates negative in an effort to get all these foreigners out of their banking system because they were messing up their currency system over there because there's just too much demand for their currency units. But anyway, I digress. Now, what's interesting is this time period that we're in now, we just saw a very similar event to that what happened with Nixon in 1971. Just like Nixon in 1971 took us off that gold standard, we have this inflationary event that was started by the government. The government, because of the medical event, printed a bunch of money. They backed loans in the banking system in a way that they've never done historically with the PPP loans. And that has created a tremendous amount of currency units. And you can see it in the M2 money supply just going absolutely vertical over the last couple of years, right? So what's interesting as well is that just like in the 1970s, today we have an expansionary demographic of young adults, something that the United States has not had since the boomers. We have the millennials. And just like the boomers were going into their home buying years, today the millennials are also going into their home buying years. There is a tremendous amount of homes that are not built to accommodate this expansionary demographic. So what that is likely to do is that means that there has to be new homes built and new loans against those new homes built to create, to satisfy the housing demand of this new generation. And so there's just a tremendous amount of parallels, right, between 70s and today when you think about this. Now, going back to the original question that I posed at the beginning of this video, does inflation create inflation? We originally saw in the 1970s there was that event with Nixon and the gold standard was removed and it created this huge inflation cycle, right? And during that whole time, you had the expansionary demographics of young adults getting more loans. But at what point did that event cause the secondary events to kind of be more inflationary than it otherwise would have, right? When people see that there's this high rate of inflation, people panic. At what point does the interest rate on a loan just become irrelevant? You know, one of the things you see in the housing cycle in the 1970s is interest rates just go up and up and up and up and up. You know, is that because of the demographic or is that because of something else too, right? I think what a lot of people think is today is that, well, you know, the interest rates are on home loans are too high, the houses are unaffordable, and millennials just can't afford these houses, you know. At what point does, you know, based on this current event that we have today with the inflation and the medical event, at what point does these interest rates not matter, right? I think what a lot of people miss is they say, okay, these interest rates, they're higher. They're telling you that, okay, the demand is going to come down. What higher interest rates are really telling you is that the demand for loans is going up. When you have a bank, they're a business, right? When you say you're at the bank and everybody's knocking on your door trying to get a loan, maybe because some of that is this inflation expectation, banks are a business. They see all this demand and they're like, whoa, okay, everybody wants a loan. Let's just go ahead and raise the interest rate. You know, so they seek the profit maximizing output for their product, which is loans, right? So when they have higher and higher interest rates, that's telling you that there's more demand for these loans. So at what point does this medical event cause there to be more loans, regardless of affordability? At what point do the interest rates go higher? At what point is there a feedback loop where this inflation, this original kickoff event, simultaneously feeding in with this expansionary demographic of millennials and the home buying years, and Joes and Janes going out and getting marginal loans that they may not otherwise have? At what point does that just kick off a new inflation cycle today, much like that happened in the 1970s? This is just some of the stuff that I've been thinking about. Maybe it's out there. I'd be curious to hear what your guys' opinions in the comments below. And let me know what you guys think, and have a great day.